An elderly woman, shifting from foot to foot, walked through the junkyard. She had no home, no place to be accepted and loved. Her only son, whom she had loved so much, had just put her out on the street. Now he was living in wealth, enjoying life, and just being happy. He didn't even consider the fact that, while he was enjoying his wealth, his mother was asking passersby for money, unable to find a single piece of bread, often starving all day long. An expensive car drove by. The elderly woman turned around and thought it might well have been her son. She looked around, but the car passed her too quickly. But her son, who was actually in the car at the time, was humming a song nonchalantly. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at himself in the mirror, rejoicing at how well his life had turned out after all. All this time, he had dreamed of being wealthy, happy, and now, finally, it had happened. He had money, a beautiful wife, and everything he wanted. During this time, he did not even think of his mother. As soon as he thought of her, he forbade himself to think of her further. She was too old for him. Only the potential costs, nothing more, as he liked to put it. "Here we go again," Charles said grudgingly, as he looked at the phone number that popped up on his screen. He put the phone to his ear and rolled his eyes. "Hello, I'm driving." He spoke sharply, and it was immediately clear that the person who called him clearly did not like him. It was the wife he loved. He had long wanted such a beauty to show off to his partners. The longer he was with her, however, the more trouble he had with her. Lately, he had grown very tired of her pretensions, of her constant tantrums, of the endless conditions he had to agree to for her sake. "Look, honey, you said we were going to buy a phone. Why do I have to wait? My friend posted a picture on social media today. She now has the phone I wanted. I'm embarrassed to even go with it today. Do you want me to embarrass myself?" Karen was indignant. "If you're going to make me nervous every day about this stupid phone, you're definitely not going to get it," the man said grudgingly. But it turned out she didn't care at all about his reasoning. "If you don't give a damn about what I want, I'll file for divorce. You think I'm going to sit and wait for you?" replied Karen sharply. She hung up, and Charles tossed the phone into the passenger's back seat, too. The wonderful mood he'd been in just a few minutes ago was immediately ruined. He rolled his eyes, already anticipating another scandal waiting for him when he got home. More conditions, more talk about how embarrassing it was for her to show up in front of her friends. He wanted her to stay with him, but the man was not at all opposed to her behaving a little more modestly. As soon as he appeared in the office, the smile reappeared on his face. "Here they are, new contracts, new income," he smiled. Well, that was it. He didn't care about any more problems, only money and only profit. The car that was backing up was just pulling into the landfill. Surely, the man behind the wheel had to ask the local authorities several times to unload the garbage. But each time there was a reason. And now he just decided that he would take everything out himself, just so there would be no more junk piled up near his house. Michael looked around as if trying to find someone to help him, but no one was around. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't even notice the old lady, and almost threw a big bag at her. "Oh, I'm sorry," Michael said, and a goofy smile appeared on his face. But then he froze. He saw the mother of his childhood friend, the same Susan who had treated him like her own son, even better than his own mother. He froze, staring at her. He didn't know if he was right or wrong, but they were the same blue eyes that had faded with age. It was the same hair, the same pale skin, even a mole above her lip. "Susan? Oh my God, that can't be right," he said, immediately running up to her, realizing he hadn't misidentified himself. "Oh, Michael, honey, it's so good to see you," the older woman said with a smile. "Why aren't you wearing your glasses? Did something happen to Charles? Why did you get here?" Michael asked in amazement. Susan was silent. She looked first at her feet. Then she looked at her son's childhood friend. And now Michael realized that this must have been an unpleasant subject for her. He couldn't just leave her here. He packed up her few belongings, threw out most of what she considered her only possessions. He feared that her health, which was not in the best of health as it was even worse out here. Michael gently sat her down in the car, glancing at her as if he feared that at any moment she would refuse, that he would have to talk her down. But the old woman got into the car without complaint. She looked around strangely, as if she were afraid of getting her seat dirty. Michael immediately got in the driver's seat and drove home, glancing at the old woman. She was crying, wiping her eyes, and he was afraid to even ask her what had really happened. While Susan took a shower, he ran to a nearby store and bought some bathrobes. They turned out to be large, but they were clean clothes. The old woman was insanely grateful for his concern. "Tomorrow we'll buy you something that fits you. I'm sorry, I got confused," he said. He looked at her with pity. He could not understand how such a good, caring, kind woman suddenly found herself on the street. What had happened to her apartment? To her son? All this did not fit in his head. He sat her down at the table, put on the dinner he had heated since yesterday, and now he waited for her to tell him at least part of the whole story, to find out the details. "Charles said he wanted to start a business, that he'd thought it through, he'd found people to help him. He needed the money. He talked me into selling the apartment, and I, an old fool, went along with it," the old woman said, wiping away her tears. She still blamed herself for believing her son at the time. "As soon as he got my apartment, he kicked me out, and I followed him, begged him to at least give me to some nursing home. But my son threw me out of the car to this dump like an unwanted kitten. That's all. That's pretty much the whole story," said the older woman. "That's creepy. I remember him as a boy. He was so kind. I don't even believe he's capable of that," said Michael, bewildered. "Don't worry, you have a home now. Everything will be all right now. Don't worry, I'll go and talk to him. Maybe he's in some kind of trouble." "He won't listen to you," said the older woman. "He's doing fine. His elderly mother walks through the dumps looking for a piece of bread. He doesn't care about me, and he probably never cared about me. Now he only wants money, and he doesn't want his own mother." Michael's heart just cringed when he saw her crying. He wanted to do whatever it took to keep her from being upset anymore, to not see her tears dripping on her clothes. Michael's mother had always been an alcoholic. She drank a lot. For weeks, she couldn't get out of her rather dubious states. His fathers were constantly changing, so he could not count on their support. And only his neighbor, Susan, was always ready to take him in, to help him, to give him advice, and to feed him. She would do anything to keep the boy alive in this nightmare world. He remembered how she had treated him when he was a boy, and he would not abandon her now, even if her own son abandoned her again. The next day, Michael arrived at his old friend's house to discuss all that he had learned and what had happened. He wanted to hear from Charles that he had abandoned his own mother, to look him in the eye, because he could hardly believe that his childhood friend was capable of such a thing. When Charles accepted Michael, he was all lit up with happiness, but he wasn't happy to see his childhood friend. He was happy they had another chance to brag about what he had accomplished. "Here, look, what a business, what an office, all mine, and all by myself. Well, maybe not all by myself, but it's definitely all mine now," the man said smugly. "You better tell me, why did you kick your mother out of her apartment?" asked Michael. Charles was silent. He didn't look happy. It was clear at once that his friend was not going to be jealous of him. He grimaced. "It's her own fault," he said firmly, except that his words didn't sound like the truth. Michael waited for Charles to explain, but he didn't. He showed with all his appearance that he had no regrets. "Are you trying to teach me about life? Where did you find her? Is she still alive or what?" he asked grudgingly. "I found her in a dump. Why do you live here in riches while your old mother searches for a piece of bread in the dumps? Can't you pay for your mother to go to some nursing home? She gave all her years of her life to you, taking care of you. Look, fate will punish you severely for such a thing," said Michael. "I'm not afraid of any fate," said Charles with a chuckle. Michael knew at once that there was no use in explaining anything. He looked intently at his friend. He was already a different man, spiteful and mercenary. Before him stood a man who had thrown his own mother away, and who did not care about her health or her life. "Okay, let's end this dialogue," Charles said emphatically. A nasty smirk appeared on his face again. "Come on, join me. We're going to the restaurant now, and I'll ask my wife to bring a girlfriend. And then maybe I'll take you into the business too." Charles held out his palm. Michael didn't shake his hand. The man turned around rather abruptly and walked out of the office. Michael was on his way home. He went over in his head not only the whole situation, but also Charles's words. He had no regrets about what had happened. He didn't even ask how his mother was feeling. He was thinking about girls, fun, and money. Michael could hardly recognize this man as someone he had once been friends with. Susan was sitting at home. She was holding the phone that Michael had given her. Susan didn't believe Michael could change her son's mind. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she hoped that her son would change his mind and call. But her son didn't call. Not an hour or two. Susan wiped away her tears again. She did not understand what she had done to deserve such treatment. Of course, now she was insanely grateful to Michael that he had saved her, given her a home and food, and was not going to leave her. But she cried because her own son, the man for whom she was willing to do anything, had just kicked her out to sell an apartment. She cried because she missed her son so much. Slowly, Susan came to terms with the fact that her son was never coming back to her. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She expected at least a phone call. However, no call came. She had been living with Michael for months, and she thanked him every day that he had saved her from a horrible life in the dump. She hoped she could repay his kindness by at least cleaning, cooking, and laundry. She cared for him, and he cared for her, as if she were his own mother. But not a day went by without Michael remembering the words of Charles. One day, Susan became ill. They took her to the hospital, ran tests, conducted examinations. The doctors made a disappointing diagnosis. The woman didn't have long to live. "Don't get upset. Yes, my life was hard, but everything ends someday," she said as she lay in her hospital bed. Michael sat beside her. He brought her the bouquet of flowers she loved so much. Beside her lay her favorite book. She looked at Michael lovingly.
"Thank you so much, Michael. I'm glad you spent the last months of my life with me,"
she said affectionately. The older woman continued to speak without taking her eyes off Michael. Michael looked at her almost through tears. He was terribly afraid of losing her now. "You sound as if you were already saying goodbye."
"What's the use of procrastination? I'm glad you were with me, but don't torture yourself. Leave me here,"
said the old woman. "Well, no. You've been like a mother to me, and you think I'm going to leave you? No. You have a home, and you will be home," Michael insisted. He wasn't going to leave her at such a difficult time, and if she was destined to live only a few more months, he would want her to spend them in comfort, next to a man who was willing to take care of her. Just a few days after Susan was home, Michael made another attempt to reason with her son. He made an appointment and arrived at the right time. "I knew you'd change your mind. No one turns down that kind of money. Did you see the car I bought?" smirked Charles. He didn't even ask about his mother. He was sure Michael had come here to get a job with him. "Charles, your mother is dying," Michael said, looking him straight in the eye. He hoped that these words would awaken something human in him, but his friend's face turned angry. "Whatever, she's old now. Do you even know how much money she needed for treatment? I could have bought a car with that money," Charles said sharply. Now Michael was in shock. He looked at his childhood friend and couldn't believe it was the same person. He had just compared his mother's life and an expensive car, making a choice not in favor of his mother. "Are you completely obsessed with your money? Your mother is dying. I'm not asking you for money. I'm not even asking you to come. All I'm asking you to do is call her. She won't let go of the phone. She keeps waiting for you to call her." "Apparently she's completely out of her mind," Charles replied. "She devoted her whole life to you. She raised you, your whole childhood. She even got you out of jail," Michael shouted. "Michael, you and I have been friends for a very long time. I'm offering you the perfect thing right now. I'll call good people and they'll help you like they helped me. This is the only time I'm offering you. If you don't agree now, you don't have to come to me anymore. Stop talking about that old woman," Charles said gruffly. "Fate doesn't forgive such things." Michael walked out of the office. He couldn't believe in his mind that Charles was so cruel. And yet, once upon a time, they had been such friends. No matter how long the poor old lady had to live, let her at least live her last weeks in love and care. 2 years passed. Michael stood at the big gravestone looking at the picture, a smiling, happy old lady. "Thank you for everything, Susan," Michael said with a smile. He put the flowers down, stroked the photograph with the palm of his hand. Most recently, he had put up a memorial when he had the money to do so. Too bad the old lady was no longer alive. He met her completely by chance. He gave her food and a place to live. But one day, when she went to bed, her heart stopped. And there was still the phone lying next to her. She was still waiting for a call from her son. Meanwhile, Charles stood outside the large office building his company once occupied. Before he knew it, his company was no longer his property. The people who had first helped him had now simply stripped him of everything. The white car was being driven away. He was now completely destitute. He watched the company fill up with other employees. Messages came to his phone that his bank accounts had been emptied. He had lost everything overnight. Memories flashed vividly in his mind: cool parties, beautiful girls, travel, expensive hotels. All that would forever be in the past. It was a strange feeling. It was as if he had lost the only thread that connected him to his real life. Now began a nightmare that seemed endless. He walked home. Nothing else bothered him except the thought that he had lost everything he had worked so hard for. He didn't have the strength to start over from the beginning. The only thing he got was deceit and betrayal. "Will you at least explain something to me?" shouted Karen. Charles, barely able to move his legs, walked into the living room. "We're beggars now," he said, looking at her. She stared at her husband as if she had never seen him like this. She was shaking with anger. "What do you mean by that? Is this some kind of silly prank?" she exclaimed. "Fool, they took the company away from me. They took everything from me. You and I are absolutely beggars," he shouted, grabbed the vase, and threw it against the wall. Karen shuddered at the loud sound, but did not take her eyes off her husband. It was as if she was trying to figure out if he was telling the truth or trying to scare her. But it turned out that they really had lost everything. Everything was over. "So, as long as there are no debts, we should get a divorce," she suggested insistently. "I've had enough. I've put up with you sparing me money all the time. Believe me, I have enough options to replace you, so I won't even remember your existence." She spoke indifferently. Charles was completely indifferent, even though she had once been the woman of his dreams. Karen packed her things rather quickly. A few hours later, he received a call from her lawyer. Charles watched his whole life fall apart. There is absolutely nothing he can do about it. He just watches from the sidelines and blames himself for not getting his insurance in time. Then the words of his friend popped into his head about how fate would punish him very cruelly for the way he had treated his mother. Then Charles laughed and said there was no such thing as fate. Now he understood that he had received it all as punishment, and that nothing more could be taken back. With anger, he grabbed everything he could get his hands on, tossing it around, not knowing how to make himself calm down. Charles decided that all was not yet lost, because at night he had a wonderful idea to go and apologize to his mother. What if all this was still reversible? The idea seemed so wonderful that he did not wait for the right moment, getting ready literally in a matter of hours. The car was gone, no money for a cab either. Charles walked, remembering where his former childhood friend, who was so eager for him to make peace with his mother, was now settling in. "Look, here's the thing. I've decided to apologize to my mother," Charles said as Michael opened his apartment door in front of him. "Then go to the cemetery. Your mother's dead," Michael pronounced. "I saw in the news what happened to your office. You think you'll ask her for forgiveness and everything will come back to you in a heartbeat? No. You don't get to judge me," Charles said. "It is not for me to judge you? Your mother, whom I took in, even on the day she fell asleep and didn't wake up, kept her phone beside her. She hoped you would call her. You didn't show up until after you'd lost everything. Go to the cemetery and ask for forgiveness," Michael said. Charles left, but never went to his mother's grave. He couldn't go home because he didn't have a home either. There were only debts and an impending divorce. A week went by. Another. The months flew by. The divorce was over. Karen was having fun with a new, wealthy suitor. The company thrived under someone else's management. The house had long since been bought. Another happy family now lived there. Charles was now the most common security guard. Thought he would never return to a happy life again. The partner entered the premises. His face lit up with a smile. "Why so happy?" asked Charles. He himself thought that with a salary like that, it was impossible to be happy. "My wife called. We're having a boy," the man exclaimed cheerfully. He clapped his hands and laughed happily. It was obvious at once that this news brought him a lot of positive emotions. "Why are you so happy?" "One baby expense," said Charles. Well, the hell with money. Are we living for money? Said the partner. There's nothing more precious in life than family. Raising children, loving one person all your life, making up, fighting, going through all the hardships of life. That's happiness. And money? If you ask me, it's better to have a happy family than to be rich but lonely. These words had such a powerful effect on Charles that all the way back to his dormitory, he thought about family. His mother, the poor unfortunate mother who had worked 3 jobs to give him a decent future. And how did he repay her? He put her out on the street because he didn't want to spend the money on a new place to live for her. He didn't want to spend the money on treatment. He just got rid of her, thinking she was an unnecessary expense to him. After all, she was the only person who truly loved him. Even after all he had done, she would take her son back. And now she was just lying in the damp earth. Involuntarily, tears appeared on his face. Monstrous images flashed through his mind of how cruel he had been to his mother. As soon as he reached the apartment of his former childhood friend, Charles fell into his arms. Michael hugged him for old time's sake. Charles sobbed, remembering his past life. Things could have been very different. What good did it do him to spend a few years in wealth? What had that money given him? He could have spent all that time with his friend, with a normal woman who would love him for nothing. Could have been around people who loved him and accepted him. Michael comforted him. His childhood friend put him in the car and they drove to the cemetery so that Charles, who was conscious of his actions, could talk to his mother. He had had every chance to talk to her when she was alive, but now he would have to turn to the gravestone. "Did you put up the memorial?" asked Charles. "Yes," Michael answered briefly. They were silent, standing in front of Susan's grave. The old woman in the picture was smiling as she looked at them. Charles dropped to his knees. He wept again. Michael sat down on a high bench, watched it all. He could not discern what his former friend was really feeling. Does he want to beg forgiveness to get leniency from life? Or has he really realized how cruel he was to his mother? But Charles, through his tears, kept apologizing. He buried his head against the monument, apparently continuing to ask his mother's forgiveness. When they left, Charles felt a little better. He said goodbye to his friend and went to the dormitory where he rented a small room. Barely had he gone to bed when the image of his mother appeared before his eyes. "Mother?" was all Charles could say. She put her old, wrinkled fingers to his lips. "Hush, son. Hush," she said. "Nothing, Charles. Nothing. I don't hold a grudge against you. You're my son. That's the way it is. I waited for a call from you at least, but I didn't. Goodbye, son. Goodbye for now," said the old woman. He begged her forgiveness again. She hugged him. He felt warm, but immediately realized it was just a dream. The old woman looked him straight in the eye. "Start all over again, son. Only this time, do everything yourself. Don't expect anything, and don't expect honesty from those who have never been honest," she said. Charles woke up with a clean soul and a light heart. He felt that his mother had forgiven him. He himself could hardly ever forgive himself. But his mother was right about one thing. It was time to start all over again. He planned to make peace with his friend, to start afresh. In the meantime, he had the most normal job waiting for him, and the guilt that sometimes overwhelmed him.